We're joined by journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman, former Conservative Culture Minister Ed Vaizey and Newsweek's chief royal correspondent Jack Royston. Good morning to all of you. Jack, we haven't seen you since all the drama of the revelations of the book. I wonder, in all your experience of covering the royals, and we've had a lot of Prince Harry, Meghan stories, we've had the Netflix documentaries, we've had the Oprah Winfrey interviews. Did you expect the level of detail and quite the headlines that we've had from his book?
This is definitely the most intimate, most private account we've ever had of any royal family member in history. I mean, there's stuff in this book that actually, you know, deserves attention and that people will feel really sympathetic about, like the fight with William. Harry must have felt awful after that. I can just imagine him leaving feeling completely shaken. But there's other stuff which
William might have felt awful as well.
Well, we will never know, because William will never say. But perhaps, yeah, perhaps he did. I mean, I'm sure that there are all kinds of moments throughout this story where William would have felt awful as well. I think perhaps William did acknowledge that there was some fault there in going back and apologising. But there's also a level of detail in this book about Harry as a person that really feels like you would never have seen it in a royal book. Talking about, you know, losing his virginity, his bum being snapped by the woman, his frostbitten royal member, That's
a detail we haven't shared with anyone this morning just yet. But
that was to do with a walk.
Yeah,
he did with some of his
jewels,
mates.
Yes, yeah, but he went on a walk with some ex-servicemen in the Arctic, didn't he? And he got frostbite.
He got a little bit of frostbite, yeah. And that is, I mean, that's a detail that could well have found its place in a kind of Katie Price memoir.
Sorry, Jack, there's part of me that thinks about the Prince Harry that we knew, now a Duke, of course, who was in the army, that was really honest and really normal and really down-to-earth, that would share a story like that. And actually, that's so relatable, particularly to people who've been in the armed services and have been on an extraordinary trek, that he's not worried about sharing something like that. That makes him very human.
That is definitely true, and I think a lot of people are actually going to be quite pleased to see a reprisal of Harry the Lad, because we've got all these stories of, you know, like, well, some people may be very worried about the drug taking and the cocaine. I think also people are going to quite enjoy going back to that era of his life when he was kind of a little bit rough around the edges, a little bit of a loose cannon, but he was going around having fun and enjoying himself. And that version of Harry was actually hugely, hugely popular with the public. So I think there is an opportunity for people to re-engage with... You know, Harry and Meghan have lost a lot of their popularity in Britain, but British people will get a chance to re-engage with the version of Harry that they loved.
It is extremely exposing. He is sharing to the nth degree, isn't he? And do you wonder... I mean, one of the things, Ben, you said earlier, you know, he brings up the wearing of the Nazi uniform and attributes an element of support in it from a sort of
responsibility.
around way and responsibility to William and Kate. They both said, go for it, it's hilarious. And you said, why would he even bring that up? Do you think, in a way, he thinks, if I'm going to share, I don't want to be accused of not sharing the bits that are rather shameful to me. I'm just going to get it all out there.
I think if you're sharing that much, you have to share it all.
Right.
And all of this sharing makes me feel quite sorry for him. I would not want to be born into any job, and particularly not that job. I would not want to lose my mother in such a painful and public way. However, I mean, these revelations make me think that what he really needs is a hug and a bit of quiet time. He does not need a £40 million book deal, a 4-book deal and a Netflix series. And the problem for me is that he is guilty of exploiting our lust for royal stories just as much as the tabloid editors and journalists that he abhors. He knows that these stories are going to generate news headlines. He knows that it's going to be on the front pages of all the papers. And he's cashing in on it. And I do feel really sorry for him. I mean, obviously, seeing these pictures of him as a young boy, you remember what he was. You remember that he was in the army, that he put his life on the line for this country. And I just feel really sad that his career now is selling these stories. And that is what he's doing. He's selling stories, just like all of the tabloid journalists that he says such negative things about.
I think there is something, Ed, isn't there, as Jenny was saying, his mental health, when you look at these, you worry about. And as somebody who has, along with Meghan and along with William and Kate, they set themselves out as advocates for mental health to be there, that you worry that, you know, he's not necessarily the best advocate right now because the sort of the seeming... sharing of all of the information that he is and the detail that he's doing, you just feel he looks really vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's an argument that kind of truth and honesty is a way of sort of clearing the decks and potentially supporting your mental health, but I think I've said on this programme before, you know, that this is a very damaged individual, and it's not surprising if you see what happened to your mother and you go through that, but you go through it in the full glare of publicity and you never have a chance to be a private individual. And I think when he found the love of his life, Meghan Markle, who I think is probably the love of his life, the way he felt that she was treated by the press and by the royal family have kind of reinforced that. So he's a very damaged individual, and to a certain extent we're all exploiting that, and he is exploiting it with us, and it's all just very confusing. I mean, I think when you take a step back from it in terms of, you know, people refer to the royals at war, if you're supporting the kind of William and royal family narrative, you will continue to support it. If you are sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, you'll continue to support them. It's not going to move the dial in terms of which camp you're backing. And for someone like me who kind of sits in the middle, and I feel like I can sort of see both sides of the argument, I just feel very sad. And this is kind of irreparable damage. And if you're William getting up this morning, going to a royal engagement this morning, you're going to feel utterly mortified. You're going to feel scrutinised in a way you weren't a few days ago. And it's going to be very, very painful. And the question is obviously, you know, where do we go from here? I mean, we certainly don't go back to Harry playing any role in the royal family. It reminded me a bit, I mean, much less damaging in the light of what Harry's done, the Martin Bashir interview with Princess Diana. And we're still talking about that, 30 years later? I mean, that kind of shook the royal family to its foundations. And this is kind of that interview.
There was so much about that we didn't know how the interview came about and that she was duped into doing it. You know, the revelations of that. And as you say, you wonder what will come out from in 20 years' time from this book.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it, Jack? I mean, some of the stories that you listed, the frostbite on the private members, the drug taking, the loss of virginity at the back of the pub, it's all what people would say was classic clickbait. It's the sort of thing you put there to make people click and go and read a further story. The things that he says he hated about the way his narrative was being presented before by newspapers and other media outlets. How much pressure would he have been under by the publishers, potentially by Netflix as well, in order to give some more and to give that clickbait?
He would have been under a huge amount of pressure because obviously they do want to justify the huge sums of money that they've spent on these projects. But there's actually another interesting dimension which is less discussed, which is that actually it's not just pressure from Netflix and from the publishers of his memoir, because if he doesn't deliver, it's also pressure from the wider public and media. Because the media, you know, there's always a huge amount of media attention around these things, and then everybody expects to get new chapters in this story. And this was actually one of the criticisms that started to blossom in America after Netflix, was that they hadn't given enough. It wasn't different enough to Oprah. Why are they revisiting such a painful story over and over again? And that was starting to pop up in magazines like Variety, where you don't particularly expect to find criticisms of Harry and Meghan. So it's a dual pressure, and in some ways, the pressure being exerted on Harry by the publisher and Netflix might actually have shielded him from some of the pressure that they would have then faced from the media and from the public.
But then you think, in a few years' time, when he looks back at this turbulent, torrid episode, is he going to think to himself, gosh, I was being controlled and I wasn't free again? Or will he realise that some of this is based on his decisions?
I think he will realise that some of this is based on his decisions. He felt that, he was being controlled when he was in the palace and that he couldn't do what he wanted and that he wasn't in control of his own narrative. He is out of the palace now. The only real control, proper control that was being exercised over him was the financial pressure to make enough money for a very expensive house and a security team and all the rest of it. However, you know, this is freedom. You know, we saw those videos of him on the freedom flight, as he called it, when he was on the plane. Like, this is what they wanted for all that time. They are in control now. Before, they were kept quiet because it's actually, you know, quite a well-established, successful royal PR strategy to not talk about things. Since they've started talking, their reputations have been devastated in Britain. They're more popular in America. In Britain, 2/3 of Britain doesn't like Meghan now, which is down from 55% of Britain who liked her at the end of their royal journey.
It's quite a swing, isn't it?
It's a huge, huge swing.
It makes you wonder if they'll look back and think, actually, you know, there was a reason why not speaking out has been in place for so long.
I mean,
you know?
mystique is so important for the royal family. It gives them a kind of dignity. And I worry that in a few years' time, Harry is going to have nothing left. He's going to have no material left. And I think the difference is the royal family, they live on a different timeline. They deal in decades, in generations. And this, I think, in the grand scheme of things, may be a flash in the pan. It may be this is Harry's time to kind of get it all out. But they will continue to say nothing because that's where their power comes from, the mystery of the royal family.
The one of all the revelations that have come out, Ed, the one that really shocked me, they're all shocking, but the one that I was quite surprised that he shared was him talking about the number of Taliban that he killed in Afghanistan. It felt like that, from a security perspective, for the first bit, was extraordinarily naive. And this is the quote from the book. It seemed to me essential not to be afraid of that number. He's talking about the number of Taliban he killed. So my number is 25. It's not a number that fills me with satisfaction, but nor does it embarrass me. Bad guys eliminated. Within the book, he talks about good guys and bad guys. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, that really jumped out at me when I read it as well, because it seemed, first of all, you know, I've never served in the military, but my understanding is that soldiers don't talk about that kind of thing. They probably talk about it in private, but they certainly don't talk about it in public. But secondly, obviously, the security threat that if you go out and tell the world that you've killed 25 Taliban, then people who want an excuse to attack members of the establishment, as it were, you've given them an absolutely free card to play. So I was pretty astonished that he did that. I mean, he could have talked about his time in the military and his time serving in Afghanistan, which is something that we were all very proud of when he served on the front line in a much more sensible way. So again,
but
and
then
it goes
maybe
back...
he says it's sharing the brutality of it. It wasn't just a sort of a decorative role.
But I mean, I'm not.
He had to actually deal with that awful brutality.
I'm not a student of military memoirs, but I doubt whether you'd find many military memoirs where people actually talk about the number of people they've killed. They might talk about particular incidents.
You can share the brutality without counting the dead. I think there's something a little bit grotesque about that. Also, how would you know necessarily if a bomb was dropped or whatever? I think it's putting a number on it that is eye-catching and uncomfortable for me.
Jack, just before we let you go, because we're nearly out of time in this section, I mean, the point of understanding is how they come back. Is there any way back? And crucially, the coronation, which is coming up in just a few months' time. I mean, he doesn't commit to whether he will be at the coronation in the interview with Tom Bradbury. What's your expectation? What do you think?
It's obviously not completely up to him whether he's at the coronation. He needs an invite. He can't turn up as a kind of bystander or hanger-on and kind of stand in the mile with everybody else. So he's got to have an invite. Obviously, William is going to be furious about everything that Harry's put in this book. I actually have some sympathy for Harry in relation to that relationship, but William will be furious, and I cannot see William wanting Harry at the coronation after everything that's been said.
Quite interesting if he did turn up.
But does William have the power?
in full Union Jack.
Does William have
the crowd?
Does William have the power to say to his dad, I don't want Harry there, though?
I think it's a decision that would be made jointly after discussion. I mean, Charles obviously is the king, and the Prince of Wales does not trump the king. But Charles, you know, William is Charles's son. Charles and Camilla are both mentioned as well. I think this will be discussed by the three of them together, and probably Kate as well. But William's voice does count within that conversation. He doesn't trump the king, but his voice counts. On your question about whether there's a way back for Harry and Meghan, I mean, it would have to be a long road because public opinion swings slowly. And one thing we've seen is that every time they go for the royals, every time they take a swing at them, it damages their reputation in Britain. However, one positive thing about the memoir from that perspective is that Harry is really putting detail to his allegations now, because that has been one of the problems in the past, is that he's told half stories, a name is removed, no quotes from the person who said, you know, who did this terrible thing. So now we are getting the full detail where people, and what that does is it means the public can assess for themselves whether they think that Harry is right. He's giving us not documentary evidence, but the full account. You know, this is what William said. Meghan was rude, abrasive, difficult immediately before the fight. People can assess that for themselves, and they can ask themselves whether they think that William's done anything wrong. And that means that they are actually more likely to side with Harry because they're more likely to trust what he's saying because he's trusted them with the full details.